Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Teens for Business podcast and happy Mother's Day weekend. I'm so glad you could join us on today's episode. I'm your host, Jack.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Kaiwan.
And I'm Ivan.
Today, we'll be talking about the recent trends in standardized testing and AP exams and the business involved in those exams. In fact, these AP exams have been keeping us busy over the past 2 weeks, hence why we took a break last week. So you might be asking, what are AP exams? In high schools, College Board reaches out to high schools to offer advanced placement classes to high schools, and these classes are normally more challenging than the normal classes that high schools offer. And basically, what AP exams do is they measure the mastery on the skills tested and used in those classes. These tests are scored from a range from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest. A score of 3 or above on an AP exam is normally considered passing, and the best score is a 5, which and it connotes that a student's like extremely well qualified to receive college credit and usually corresponds to an A in a college level course in the subject. However, a score of 1 would usually connote the opposite. These tests are like curved based on like the difficulties. So like some of the more difficult tests, which we'll talk about later, are you can get like a composite score of 70 and still like get the highest score of a 5. And to take these exams, you actually have to pay the College Board money, usually upwards to $70. And a lot of people take AP exams. There's like I think 2 million, I think, was the amount worldwide who took AP exams. And the College Board, the revenue from the College Board is around 1.1 billion annually, and the College Board has 300 employees, and the revenue per employee ratio is around 3,700,000. So here's some context. And then now we're gonna discuss our own experiences with our AP exams. Which exams do you guys think have been like the most difficult to take?
I think it's like pretty dependent on perspective and like if you're better at STEM or like if you're better at humanities. But for me, I think one of the hardest tests I've taken is probably a push or AP US history because I self-study that one, and like the content itself is pretty logical, like it's pretty factual. It's this event happened when, for example, Abraham Lincoln was president. This is that, like, you can't really it either happened or it didn't. It's not really so much like calculus where you have to like take some steps and then get to your answer. It's like immediately, do you know or do you not know? So like it's not an intuitively difficult. It's just like a lot of memorization, a lot of knowing the timeline of things, knowing the causes and effects. But I thought that was pretty hard because I self-studied it. So there was a lot of material, and the problem of, okay, do I need to know the specific topic? Like, is it too deep into it? And I'm just like going too much into a niche field? Or is it something I actually need to know for the test? So I thought that was pretty hard. Um, I also thought some of the tests, like AP Calc BC, for instance, the content is a little bit more challenging than, for example, like a calculus class, but the curve is good. So it really depends on like the person taking it. So because, for example, with calc, the curve is like 65%. So basically, if you get a 65%, that's still a 5, versus if you do that in like an actual school, for instance, the way my school does it, if you're like a 90% and above, that's an A. So if you did like the different curve wise, like a 65% would be categorized as pretty easy, but like that curve is dependent on the difficulty of the test, I suppose. So yeah.
Yeah, I think going off what Jackie said is like, in terms of class difficulty, there are certain exams that are like very hard, but they have like high pass rates. I think just off the top of my head, a couple exams that I took this year, like Physics C, Mechanics, and AP English Lit or A Push, like they're pretty hard. But in terms of the curve is like 60%, less than 60%. So it's gonna be quite, I wouldn't say easy, but it's gonna be like with such a large curve, it's gonna be easier to pass the test, I suppose. And even though the test is like very hard, like Physics C was probably the hardest test maybe I've ever taken in my life. So I just think that overall, there are like harder classes, but you also have to take into account that some tests they still have very high curves, so it isn't like that bad in the end.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Um, but like some tests are just like hard straight up. Like one of the APs I took this year was French, and it will be an understatement if I say I struggled a lot studying for that AP, especially like with especially AP languages. Most people who take those APs are fluent themselves, so people like us who take other languages who are not fluent with, we don't use it on a day-to-day basis. It's going to be much harder, and especially since the majority of the people who take AP languages are fluent themselves, the curve is extremely harsh. So I think um for AP French, a 70 was a 3, and to get a 5 you had to get an 80% overall, which is unheard of as compared to something like physics C, which is especially in mechanics, which is a 50% gives you a 5. So like tests vary. I found like STEM usually is more lenient on the curve. Exception would be a AP Physics 1. That curve is not lenient at all. But there's also very um outliers, I think, like AP Environmental Science, which has one of the highest fail rates out of all the entire APs. And in my opinion, AP Environmental Science was the easiest exam I've ever taken in my life. So it definitely depends based on, what College Board thinks the curve should be. Like last year, I remember for AP Lit, the curve was extremely generous. Like before, the 5 rate would be around 6-7%, but last year was like 18%, which literally doubled. But we'll see this year, especially after COVID, everything's in a mess, and College Board is trying to sort out like, okay, should we curve it better or worse than before? And they're trying to figure these things out. So I think definitely varies. The experience definitely varies from each AP exam. I wouldn't say on a difficulty. I would say based on the people who take it. Like more popular APs are generally gonna have higher fail rates, but also higher curves. Simply because there's just way more people taking them. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like when I like to like analyze these like score distributions across like AP exams and how they change over time. Like when I look at some of the score distributions, and sometimes the low like pass rate kind of deters people to like from like actually taking the exam, but sometimes they just like don't take into account that there's like a ton of people that are taking it. Like the physics one, although it has a little bit of a bad curve, and I took physics one actually like just this week. I personally felt like it was a little bit easier than what we covered in the than how we did it in the class. But like it has like an 8% 5 rate, I think, and it has one of the highest fail rates. So definitely I think that like people I think their perceptions of like difficulty of the exam may be like distorted by like how many people like really take it, and if they specifically just like look at the score distributions and stuff. And then like and then even like I feel like I've heard like some schools actually like may like have AP exam like results. Like the scores come out in July, and sometimes if you submit these score results to your school, sometimes your school can like use these scores to influence your GPA. So what do you guys like think of that?
I think it's pretty fortunate for me in like my school system. We don't use AP grades. So like you can be getting 99% in your actual class with your teacher and then get like a 1 on your exam, and that would have no weighing on your like GPA or like your actual school grade. Um, but then at the same time, my school or my county is pretty flexible. Like we don't have final exams or anything like that. So it is relatively lenient in the sense that students have more opportunities to like bring their grade up, and it's not so much reliant on a single test like a final or like the AP exam itself. But I have heard of like instances where um like the AP exam really does have a big effect on your grade for your school. And like if you get a good grade on your AP, like you get a 5, that's like a really good boost for your GPA. But if on the opposite side, if you get like a 1 on your AP score, you that could really harm your GPA. And because like I've always been in this one particular school system. We don't really have, like I said, it's pretty lenient in the sense that you can have multiple tests that come together to make up your grade, and it's not so much like reliant on one single test. I think I prefer it that way just because it takes the pressure off of doing so well on one exam. Like, obviously, I want to do well on the AP tests anyways. I still want to get fives anyways, but knowing that like it could have such a big effect on your actual GPA is really nerve-wracking. And I feel like that would just create a lot of pressure on students to really, really do well on a certain AP test. And I feel like that pressure is just a lot to handle.
Yeah, I think like for my school as well, like the AP tests have no bearing on our final grade. And yeah, we also don't have finals for the classes that we have AP classes in for the second semester. So grade wise, it's pretty it's like pretty easy to like get an A at our school. But like for the harder AP classes, I don't want to like bash my teachers, but like some it's like I have like pretty high grades in a lot of my classes, but like going into the AP test, it just feels like they could have done a better job like prepping us in terms of the tests that they give throughout the school year. So like the difficulty is a bit more aligned with the AP test, and instead of like they could like curve it a little bit instead of I guess like making the test easier. Like for physics, for example, going back to physics, I know it's a hard test, but still just like the actual AP test compared to like the test that we basically did in class is it's like a very large gap. So I think having AP exam scores influence GPA, that I don't think that should happen just because it's not necessarily the student's fault if the teacher like depending on the way that they teach the class. So yeah, I think that the fact that a lot of schools that don't have AP exam scores influencing GPA, that's probably the way to go.
Well, my school is actually kind of well known for using an AP curve. So since my school is focused really on APs, like our school lets you take any AP you want. Basically, there's virtually no limitations on what you want to take, what you don't want to take. So many of the students in my school, including me, take a lot of APs. Like students, like if you go out and say, "Oh, I come from my school," and they're like, "Oh my God, do you have like 16 APs, whatever?" Um, and one of the reasons why is probably because the AP curve, which we do have in our school, like it basically if you get a 3 or above, so if you pass and you have like a decent score in the class, like a B or a B plus or A minus, then it will automatically curve to A. But if you get a 2 or below, then even if you have an A, automatically gets curved to a B. So that's the general situation what happens, but usually what you see are people's grades getting boosted because our teachers are well, they're financially motivated to prepare us well for the test. So and they also have like tons of years experience for preparing. And generally, students in my school do well on the APs. I heard some teachers complain like, especially like one of the econ teachers. They're like, this student should not be passing my class because they don't pay attention in class. You know, they just goof around. They don't take me seriously, whatever, and they just shouldn't have a passing score in the class. But they go and take the AP, and since some of the APs are easy and you can study for yourself, they get a 5 or 4 or even a 3, and their grade automatically gets boosted to A or B plus, whatever. And so that's one of the problems of the AP curve, but generally it is usually better to raise students' grades, and the AP exam definitely has a higher weight on the final grade rather than the class.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective, Ivan. I want to go back to like Ivan's point about like how sometimes like some teachers may decide to like not like prepare us like too well. Like in my experience actually this week, I had the AP language test, but our like AP lang like class was very like similar to like a conventional like junior level English class. Like there's books that we read and we have to write essays about them and stuff. We didn't do too much practice, but I think what our teacher wanted to do is like in AP Lang, there's this essay called like a Q3, which is like an open argument. It's like just like a conventional argument. You're given a topic, you're given a prompt, and you're supposed to like write an argument about it using your own evidence. I think like some of the language AP language teachers, especially like they want to like focus on that because like it's the most like open. And then for the other essays and like MCs, there's usually it's like how you answer is a little bit like formulaic, like especially for like Q1s and Q2 where you can give like the evidence. So like that's like really interesting with like and then generally going back to like the schools having like AP exam scores influencing GPA. I feel like sometimes like I don't things like some like AP like exam like curves like they influence too much. I mean, in my school, like some classes use like AP like curve to decide like the grades. Like if you get like a B on like this test, but that you'll get an A on the A minus in like the grade book because a B and 80% on the test would still connote to a low five or high four, which is passing, which is considered passing. Which is considered pretty good actually. So I think some schools decide not to like do that. They're like, okay, it's just solely based on your grades. Some schools like Ivans, they choose to have their AP, and and then other teachers, some of the teachers like they just do it by choice, like based on the AP curve. So that's interesting. So and then there's like a lot of like recent like what are some of the trends that you have been like experiencing regarding like AP exams and just like generally like standardized testing?
What do you mean, like trends? Just like what have I
Like
noticed?
trends like I guess an example is like have SATs and have no, I wouldn't say SATs, but have APs like AP scores like shown a increased influence in like the college
Oh,
application process. Yeah.
I see, I see. Okay. Um, I think this is actually a really interesting topic because there's a lot of difference and like diverse perspectives on it. Um, and like if you're someone with a school system like Ivan's, obviously you're gonna have more importance on it. Like if it impacts your final grade on such a high level, then of course, no matter what happens, no matter if college admissions care about it, you still will care about that AP score. But but for like SATs and ACTs, I think it really is a personal perspective and like how you think it really affects it because a lot of schools are test optional and a lot of admissions, like their official admissions websites, like they kind of emphasize that testing is optional, like not sending in a score will not hurt you. Um, but like there's also some schools where you like they had the no test policy for like 2020 or like COVID years, and then they like reverted back to their original one. So I think it depends on the school and it depends on like your personal importance on it. Like if you still think that AP or like SATs and ACTs are important, then like you will try to do really hard on it. But I think also something that's interesting that goes beyond like SAT and AP specifically is that like testing as a whole, like there was this debate, not debate, but like there's this sense, I guess, that the LSATs, which is basically like the law school thing, um there's a lot of people saying that they're not really important anymore. They might get rid of it because AI can get really high scores on the LSAT, and there's just arguments about how it's like not fair or whatever. And I think like that whole argument of are tests still important to gaining admission somewhere is like really interesting. But at the same time, it depends on your application, depends on who you are as a person, like how you feel about it. So yeah. I mean, but it's interesting how like SATs and APs are high school level usually. But then like that argument still extends outwards into like universities and people who are like 23 looking to get into law school.
Yeah, I think in terms of just like trends regarding SATs and AP exams, for college apps, I know it's like for California, I know that UCs and CSUs are kind of going like test blind in terms of like SATs and ACTs. So that means they're like kind of placing more importance on grades, and AP exams are part of that. So I think AP exams are slowly actually like gaining importance in just in terms of like what colleges are looking for in terms of your like ability to like grasp like subject information, I guess, instead of like putting it all in a standardized test like a SAT or ACT. So yeah, I think that like as AP exams are gaining importance over time, and yeah, those are just like some of the trends that I've noticed so far.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Still, I think COVID really just messed everything up. Like, I think College Board took COVID as a chance to kind of reformat everything. Like, I know for 2024, the SATs are changing to something completely different than what we're used to. Um, so College Board is definitely taking this time to change up all their standardized tests, and we will see whether the impacts for that are. But um, still, many colleges are test optional, or they don't even give you a chance to submit your standardized test scores, just like the UCs. Um, so definitely, we can see kind of a deviation away from the traditional SAT, ACT kind of standardized tests. But that also means that APs are kind of gaining more significance. Um, I think we'll talk about this later, but college credit is also becoming, a bigger thing nowadays, and especially people from my school are taking APs not for GPA but for college credit. That there are some seniors in my AP Physics C class that are trying to, not take physics at their college if they get a 5. So, uh, that has definitely also been a trend lately, I've realized.
Yeah, absolutely agree with all of your points. I've definitely noticed that like as like the SAT and the ACT are like kind of like decreasing in popularity. I think more of the admissions officers when like they're starting to like emphasize like APs and like you're attempting to like take the most rigorous courses at your school like and like in most of the college like those like tours that I do, the campus tours, the informational sessions, they always like emphasize that we're always like looking to see the rigor of the courses you take, and that usually connotes to AP and IB classes and how you do on those like tests. So definitely, I can also see AP exams becoming like more like important in like the process, but and then while also like the SAT and ACT have been decreasing in popularity. Also, like I've a personal trend I've also noticed, and I think somebody did also touch on this, is like the increased like AI. Like I don't know if digital testing is like still a thing. I know it was a thing during like the COVID years. I don't think it is a thing anymore, but I might be wrong. But like I think if there were digital testing, like people today would be, I guess, a little bit incentivized to maybe use an AI to like cheat a little bit because I think um, I read an article like a few months ago about the ChatGPT. They actually like got like a passing score on like the AP World or AP US History exam in terms of like the essay, and we could and since like people like have to like think of like um people have to like think of ideas, type it out, and that usually takes like time. People are nervous about like reaching the time like limit. I could definitely see like what how people are like incentivized to like use like AI to do that. But also that connotes like in like the future that we could pop if we were to take like online exams or like online essays and stuff with and then if those are indeed included in standardized testing, I think maybe in the future we could see an increased use of like anti like AI like writing thing, right? Anti AI writing like detectors and like the standardized testing systems. And another big trend about standardized testing in AP exams is that over time they have gotten like a little bit like more expensive. Do you guys think that currently are standardized testing and AP exams too expensive?
I think it well, so for my school, let me just start with that. There is like right now, this current year, we students who don't qualify for specific like programs based upon familial income, they have to pay like the full price, which is like around $100, I believe, for each AP test. But there is kind of like with our school specifically, if you let your counselor know that this might be problematic for you, even if you don't qualify for, let's say, free and reduced lunch or like any other specific program like that, you can still let your counselor know. And the vast majority of times, they kind of like have this little discussion with you, and then I believe you're allowed to like take them at half price, so like around $50. Um, and I think that might just be because of my school, but also for next year, all of the students taking AP tests, they will be free for everyone. So there's that. But in terms of like the actual $100 price tag, regardless of who's paying for it is a lot, like $100. But at the same time, when you consider that this is the the test is basically worth a whole like college credit, right? Like one college credit in college is more than $100. So it kind of does make sense that it's not going to be exactly cheap for a test. And there's also graders who have to like look through your paper and like grade, for example, your essays and FRQs. And it's not just like one single grader looking at it. They like have multiple readers go through, and like they're not paid at a high rate, but at the same time, you still have to account for all the different costs incurred through the whole process of like where are you going to take your tests, because they have to pay for that, and then like where are you, like who's reading your stuff, like the administrative costs and things like that. So I think the $100 price tag can be a really big difficulty for a lot of students, and that in itself is a huge educational disparity. But at the same time, like the $100 price tag might be a little bit high, but there's still like justifications to why there is a price point to the test.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that like in terms of just uh preparing for these exams, it takes quite a lot of money. I know like I personally got a tutor for physics, and then I got review books for each one of my APs, and if you're taking a lot of APs, that can really add up. And yeah, so I kind of think it's kind of afraid like people who don't have that much money, it's going to be harder for them to be able to take more APs. So I do think that expensive tests, they they do contribute to education inequality in the sense that just like people who have money are obviously going to have more opportunity to basically prepare themselves and do well in these exams. But like in terms of College Board and like AP exams, the costs, yeah, I agree that they are justified. To basically keep it running and like offer these many exams, there are costs. But like expensive tests like these, in terms of just like the costs that go into prepping for these exams, hiring tutors, buying review books, it definitely adds up. So there definitely is a sense of like education inequality.
I agree. AP exams are, expensive, but not expensive, but they're definitely still uh something to look out for, especially when you're taking multiple. Uh, like if you take three or four, that's already quite impact on your bank account. And definitely this cost contributes a lot to education inequality, especially for people who barely have enough money to take the AP exam, let alone study well for the exam. So this test, this entry fee kind of prevents people from like it impacts, it drastic size the wealth disparity. Like you have people with more financially sound, people who can afford to take as many APs as they want, but also like if they're struggling somewhere, they can pay a tutor or buy a review book, buy many review books. And well, some other people only have enough resources to um go to take the exam and virtually nothing else. and you have a lot of free resources online, such as Khan Academy or even in libraries. But in libraries, they're generally to be outdated and not that useful. And Khan Academy, the resources are especially limited. Like there's no on-call tutoring. There's no on-call help. That you basically only have the videos they post, which are generally pretty helpful. But I know for some it might be more difficult to use Khan Academy than others. And for like APs like Physics C, Khan Academy doesn't even have that. And so if you don't have the financial resources, then finding free online or even in-person resources are way more difficult, and having a fee that you need to pay to take the AP exam worsens that kind of problem.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of your points. Definitely see how like the high costs of the AP exams can like further like push education inequality, as like the better off students can get like tutoring and like buy all those like review books for like services to like solidify their like knowledge, while the lower income students may have like less access to like resources, and they have to like stick it out with like the free resources that are online, which some of them are reliable, and then some of them are also like kind of like unreliable, and they don't like accurately reflect what is like the content, especially since so many of these AP exams, the content has like changed so much in the past year. Like new concepts are constantly being like introduced, and like that stuff like that. And also, I was like also like a wondering, like I know College Board has this like they have like those like system of like cancellation fees and like late fees. Do you guys think that is also like a do you guys think those like cancellation fees like are those fees like also like contributing to like the education like inequality, or do you think they are like justified by College Board?
Personally, I never really kind of well, okay, that's not true. So for cancellation fees, I think you do like get money back. I think it's like 40, or maybe the other way around. But like basically, you do get some money back if you cancel, which does make sense. And I think like the system of like a cancellation fee is kind of necessary, because if you didn't have it, it would encourage, or it could potentially encourage, this like environment of signing up for an AP test you know you're not going to take, just to have your like I don't know application, or like just have your GPA look really good, and then by the time like what like the time to actually take it comes, there's no consequence to canceling, so people just cancel it. So I do understand like why the cancellation fee exists, just to discourage a lot of people from signing up for every single AP that there is, and then when the time comes, canceling all of them, because like there's no consequence for them to do that. So like having a cancellation fee does kind of make sense to me. And then I mean, it is like kind of debatable on like if $40 is a lot, or like if that's enough, or if that's too much. But the concept of having that cancellation fee does, in my opinion, make sense. And then for like the late fees, I think the way that the late fees work is that like if you just want to take it late for no reason, or like you feel like you didn't study enough or whatever, things like that, you have to pay $40. I think that was the $40 sum, but you have to pay $40 to push it back to like the next week. But if you have a real valid excuse, like you injured your hip. This happened to my friend, but she plays soccer, and then she injured her hip. And obviously she couldn't go to her AP exam. So, but like in circumstances like that where you have a real valid excuse, I don't think you have to pay the $40, which I think is pretty reasonable, because like if you just haven't studied enough, and like there's a variety of circumstances on why that happened, it makes sense that you have to, that you can just push it back for free, or like push it back without any consequences. But because there is the caveat of if something really did happen to you, like an emergency really did happen, you can like still take it later without any like financial obligations on it. So I think that like is a lot better that they provide for any weird circumstances.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like I think the I definitely think some of the cancellation fees are a little bit like justified. It's basically like we said like there's like some extenuating circumstances that prevent someone from like studying or like doing AP exams, but there's other people who just are, I guess, I mean, they could be also like overwhelmed by the amount of APs that they like take, and that's like also like perfectly normal. Like some people like when if they have two APs in one day, they can like reschedule one of them to like a second administration time. Does that cost money? I'm not too sure about that. I don't think that costs money, right? I might be wrong though. But I think definitely, I think the cancellation fees, we could definitely see like a little bit of a justification. And there's definitely a current debate of it. I don't think we're going to go further than that in today's discussion. So I think we touched on this like earlier, but we would let's like transition to like the future of like standardized testing and like AP exams. What do you think are like some of the trends that will like occur in the future, like of standardized testing and AP testing? Do you think like standardized testing, like do you think like more schools are gonna go like test optional slash test blind, or more schools going back to their original like systems, like in like a few like years, like 4 or 5 years? What do you think would happen like, in that circumstances?
I think a lot of schools would continue to um have this test optional route because a lot of schools like jumped on this trend of like test optional because of COVID-19 and like how you couldn't really take the test because everyone was quarantined at home. But a lot of schools, or some schools at least, they started this whole like test optional policy even before COVID began. So something else prompted them to have that change. And I think like in the future, and like for like the next 5-ish years, I think standardized tests are going to be a lot less relevant than what they are right now because there is a lot of pushback from people saying how like standardized test scores are very unfair. Like there's a whole argument loaded with like how it disproportionately counts like some groups as like with less high scores than other groups, even though they might just have the same amount of knowledge, and like just a lot of inequality regarding this whole like standardized testing atmosphere. So I think a lot of educators especially would be advocating for like a less relevant test score environment. So I think they will become less important in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, as we said before, some colleges have permanently, changed their test stance, like the UCs. But there's also other universities who kind of reverted back, which is like MIT, who says that you must have a standardized test score, you must submit one. And in my opinion, since College Board is kind of changing their standardized test, especially SAT, like they have a new version of SAT coming up where it's on the computer and they vary the difficulty based on how well you do in previous sections. And so we can I'm not too sure about what this means for future test takers. Like I think the first year will be for a year younger than us, so the current sophomores, and it's definitely so different from previous SATs. I don't think colleges can take that they should take that into account since it's so different and it's a completely new system where they can't see standardized test scores the same as before, which is from a test which everyone takes and it's the exact same for everyone. um so definitely can see standardized tests still be one of the bigger portions of college applications, but I can totally see like standardized tests becoming kind of using technology to make standardized tests a better version than before, which is like actually making it easier to gauge how well suited an applicant is to a specific, you know, specific college or whatever. So I guess the only solution would be to wait and see how well it functions as a standardized test, the new version.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I mean, like as we've seen, colleges are already kind of like fading away from some standardized testing like SATs and ACTs. I think as time goes on, um, I think that's gonna continue to be the case, but like, like they're never gonna completely go away because there has to be a way for colleges to kind of figure out your academic level, basically where you're at with these exams and how qualified you are to attend these colleges. So I think that there will be other ways, like they're gonna continue considering the other aspects of the college application, and they're gonna continue considering these standardized testing a little bit less. But like AP tests and maybe SAT and ACT are never gonna completely go away.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I can definitely see the trend in the future that people are like the administrators will definitely look to like digitalize some of the tests. I don't know if this will happen to APs. I think me like personally, I think since APs are like more like subject based, and I think the APs will continue to be in person for quite a while. But since the SAT has already like gone like digital starting like in a few years, I think we could see a similar trend with the ACT and some other like super like standardized tests. Like maybe we could see LSAT get like digitalized, and maybe other like college like even some college standardized tests we could definitely see them being digitalized. So now we're going to transition to the takeaways. What are some of your guys like takeaways from today's discussion about standardized testing and AP exams?
I thought one of my biggest takeaways was really interesting how like some schools across the United States have like your AP score really does impact your grade. Because the way my school does it is that like if you do well in your class, like your teacher's tests, you will do well in the class, right? Like you get a 98% in your class. It doesn't matter if you get a 1 on your AP test, you're still going to get a 98% in the class. Um, so like hearing how like your AP score could change your grade drastically if you failed, like that was kind of a shock. But then we talked about how like most students actually benefit from that like kind of grade curving with AP tests. And that is actually pretty interesting because I would have intuitively thought that it lowers your grade and like it puts more stress on you to do really well on that one single AP test. But if it actually helps students, then it's like pretty interesting on how like the different grade systems like take into account these like more standardized testing instead of like one teacher being like, okay, I'm going to make this test really hard and all of my students are going to fail, because AP tests, they are more standardized and like more general than any one teacher's tests, because all of the students across the nation and like international students are taking the test. They are graded upon the same or like very similar curves, so it actually has a lot of like benefits, which is pretty interesting. And that kind of contributes into like the importance and like the general relevance of an AP test in the future. But like we mentioned, for like the exact future of AP tests and like SAT tests, things like that, we still have to like just wait and see and how things go in case any like big drastic events impact things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The standardized testing realm is uh generally very complex, and I think it's definitely changing, especially after COVID. Like COVID was a turning point for College Board and all their AP SAT tests. And me personally, I think standardized tests are definitely very useful for students because they can take basically college level courses similar to college level courses in high school and academically challenge themselves and find places where they're most interested in. Like maybe some high school courses don't actually do that certain subject justice. And APs, one of the most I think benefits to standardized tests is the fact that it's standardized, especially for APs, because um like certain classes that are non-AP, it's totally up to the teacher. Like for me, I take linear algebra at school, and basically my linear algebra class could be extremely different from let's say Jackie's linear algebra class at her school. The teachers can teach Like my teacher could teach it extremely easy or extremely harder as compared to some other schools. And standardized tests kind of make sure that every single class that's taught around the globe is around the same. Like we're testing the same material, we're focusing on the same things. And um so I think APs are definitely helpful because that colleges can actually use that as an accurate gauge on whatever a student is better on um, academically, and not say like, okay, maybe I don't know what the linear algebra teacher taught in this school, but for calculus I definitely know because this student got a 5 in calculus, so I have a baseline because I know what the calculus curriculum looks like. So it's definitely much useful, and I think one of the pros of APs and standardized tests in general. Um, but definitely College Board and standardized testing still have much improvements, but I think they're definitely doing their job well in providing some sort of baseline and comparison that can be extremely useful in the college application process.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then some of my takeaways are also that like yeah, different schools are definitely gonna have different difficulties for a specific class, even if it's like the same AP class, whatever that teacher is teaching and the test that they're assigning, and the way that they're grading it, that's gonna be different. So GPAs, they're definitely like it's gonna be different for a lot of different schools. And also like AP exams, there's the one negative is that like yeah, it takes money and resources to be able to do well on a lot of APs, just because oftentimes a teacher just learning from the class isn't going to be enough to be able to get the results that you ultimately want, like 4s and 5s on APs. And yeah, tutoring, review books, whatever, they do cost money, and like not just like the test itself as well. So there's still a long way to go in terms of like making it better and more accessible for everyone. But right now, APs do have many benefits, and I don't see them going away at all in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said so far. I want to like more my takeaway kind of like goes off a little bit like Kyvan's like last point that AP exams are definitely going to be more popular as they are as the SATs and the ACTs are becoming like less used in the college application process. I think AP exams are a really good way on top of your GPA to like measure like how well you're doing like academically. Like I feel like it could be like serving as a benefit to even like get a B in like a class, but get a 5 on the AP exam because it shows colleges that you've mastered the content even though you haven't like done well in the class. So that kind of like offsets the bad influence on the GPA. And also I also think that whenever like people are like stuck when looking at another one of my takeaways is that when people are like looking at like those like score distributions, I feel like they would be like deterred based on the low pass rate, but definitely I think if they want to like they need to like consider like how many people like really like take this exam to see like oh then this many people passed it or this many people got a 5 and so on and so forth. So there's like a lot of considerations that could be made about like just the process and like just the whole like standardized testing process in general. We could say there's like a lot to it, and it'll be very intriguing to see how it evolves in the future and how its impacts and influence on like our education and like the high school like system. It'll definitely be very interesting to see how that influence changes or stays the same in the future. So that's it for our episode on standardized testing and AP exams. Thanks for tuning in to the Teams for Business podcast.